Alright, hello and welcome to the eDNA Advantech filter build guide. First, we're going to go over the tools necessary. We're going to have a heat gun or a reflow iron that we're going to be using. Ideally, you would need a wrench and a pair of pliers, scissors, or a pipe cutter. You would need a drill with a 1/4-inch UNC 20 tap and a same size die, a pair of flush cutters. And this is our replacement for the pipe cutters. Is just a blade inserted. We're going to demonstrate how it works later. And for the materials, we're going to need a 3/4-inch heat shrink tubing, approximately 2 feet of each color. You're going to be needing 2 different colors. You're going to need a spring check valve. You're going to need the BMCD 1004 SPC socket with a shutoff. You're going to need a 3/16 SS 1/4-inch NPT coupling, some thin-walled tubing, approximately 1/2 meter or 20 inches, and Advantech filter casing. You're going to be needing 24 of each because each machine has 24 filters. And for the first step, we're going to cut the heat shrink. The pieces should be approximately 1 inch long. I have a little nick here just already marked off, but all you need to do is just to cut them off with your scissors. If you don't have any, flush cutters will work just fine. It should look something like this. You would need 12 of one color and 12 of the other, total of 24 for each filter. All right, for the second part, we'll be threading the spring check valve right here. It is kind of hard to see on camera, but on each of those, there's an arrow starting at the base and pointing a certain direction. I highlighted it. There's just the same one here, but it's hard to see. What you want to do is to cut off the cone part at the base of an arrow. So the part that's arrow is pointing away from, just cut the cone off. Make sure the flush part of your cutter is flush with the base of the cone, and just gently squeeze it and rotate it, not to indent the tubing itself. And just give it some time and it should come off just like that. Notice how the tubing is not flattened. If you were to squeeze it just once, it would be disformed, but if it is, with these kind of flush cutters, you can squeeze them all the way when they form a little cone and actually just stick it in and rotate it to kind of open up the walls if you did squeeze it too hard. That would be it. Secondly, you would need that die from earlier. Die has 2 sides. The one usually with labeling is the one that has a little cone shape. It doesn't start threading at the very beginning like the opposite side does. Opposite side, you can obviously see it's the back of it, and that's the front of it because it slopes inward. What you want to do is to stick the cutoff side in the front, just perfectly perpendicularly, not to damage the threading, and just gently thread it until the base of the spring check valve is touching the die itself, just like so. The plastic is pretty soft. You don't need a wrench or anything to hold it. Just hand will be just fine. You can see it's now flush with the die. Then you want to gently unscrew it. And you'd be able to notice, since there's this cone shaped, it doesn't thread it all the way to the base. So what you will do is you will flip it around to the back side, and with already existing thread, just repeat the same process. This will make the thread go all the way up the tubing, all the way to the base of the check valve. Just like so, until it is flush, and then slowly undo it. You should check, and you should have a well-defined thread going all the way along the stem of it. And that's when you're done with threading the spring check valve. Alright, so for the third step, we're going to thread the Advantech filter itself. You will need the 1/4-inch tap itself and flush cutters once again. This is everything that was in the box shown previously. We only will be using this part. We can disregard the papers, this little white part, and the bag. We won't be needing those. First thing you want to do is to unscrew the filter. It consists of three major parts. It's this ring, this part of the filter, and just the biggest part. What you want to do is just lightly tap it until the filter part comes out and just set it aside. You'll be left with the bottom part of the Advantech filter. What you want to do is to take your flush cutters, and you get a little close up. You will need to cut off the unthreaded part of this tubing, this tip that just is narrow and is sticking out. Again, we'll use the flush part of the cutters to put up against it, flush with the rest of the filter, and again, slowly squeeze it and rotate it. This plastic is a lot harder, so it will not bend. If you just squeeze it once, it might crack and just destroy the filter. It didn't take too long, and you have a nice round hole that we'll be tapping. You can get rid of the extra pieces. Next up, you get your drill with your tap. You make sure everything is fine, there's nothing sticking out anywhere. And from the outside of the filter is where you want to begin tapping it. Make sure your drill is set to clockwise to make it drill in. As most effectively, you would set it on the table and position your drill pointing downwards, not at an angle, and just slowly start applying just a little bit of pressure and drilling in to the filter. You will feel the thread start eating in. Don't do it too fast or it'll just miss thread. At about now, you can see the tap starts coming out of the back side. That's how you know it's fully threaded through. Just switch the drill to reverse and again slowly pull it out. And just like that, it is threaded. Make sure to get rid of all of the threaded plastic on the inside. You might need to blow through it. Sometimes it gets stuck when it's curly in there, and you can see straight through it. And if you look closely on the inside, you can see the thread on the inside as well. And now you're done threading the filter. You can assemble it, basically flip it over, put the filter that you took out back, cover it with the top part, and screw on the ring part, and you will be done. And the fourth step would be actually assembling the Advantech filter. First thing you want to do is to grab the BMCD1004 CPC socket with shutoff and thread it into the 316 SS quarter-inch NPT coupling, just like that. As hard as you can with your hands for now, and set that aside. You would need to grab your Advantech filter and the spring check valve, which you tapped and dyed earlier, and that hole that we threaded in the previous step, that's where you would screw in the spring check valve with your hand. Make sure it actually grips the thread and it's not just falling through. Just do quality control that way, and it should look something like this. Next thing, you would put the heat shrink just over it. If it's correct size, it should end right before the top of the spring check valve. And on the other side, that's been pre-threaded, we didn't do anything to it, that's where you would put and thread the coupling onto it with your hand again, just hand tight for now. And that completes the fourth step. Alright, for the fifth step, we'll be tightening the coupling onto the filter. You would need that either a wrench or a pair of pliers would work. You just make sure to hold the filter on the base. Since the ring will rotate, that's not the attached part, just hold it at the base. Just squeeze the coupling and tighten it to where it's close to covering all the threads. It'll be hard to cover all the threads, but just get it as tight as you can, and do the same for the top part. That one you can use wrench as well, since it's hexagon shaped, and just tighten it as much as you can. There is still some thread showing, but that's perfectly fine as long as it's really tight. And that's it for this step. All right, next thing you would want to do is to actually heat shrink using the reflow, the heat gun. You want to set the temperature to 145 and the flow to roughly 7. Just wait for it to heat up. It does that pretty quickly, and then just point the nozzle of it onto the heat shrink efficiently. You would start from the bottom to avoid having air bubbles in the middle of it and just work your way up. It can take some time for the heat shrink to actually start shrinking. It can be quite a process. Now we can see the base getting tighter and tighter, and that's what we want, and then just slowly working our way up. Alright, after it's all nice and tight, and most of the time you can see a little divot where the filter meets the check valve. That's how you know the heat shrink is really tight, and it's like defined. You can see it there. It's nice and snug. That's when you know you're done. And for the next part, we'll be cutting the thin wall tubing. You would need 12 pieces of 77 millimeters and 12 pieces of 24 millimeters. Since our example one is using the black heat shrink, that's the one that we put the 77 millimeter tubing onto. Feel free to use calipers to quality check. These ones need to be pretty exact. And our pipe cutter has pre-measured lengths. So what you want to do is to get your thin wall tubing, and you can use whatever method to cut it. We have this, and just measure out 77 millimeters, cut it, and just put it against the calipers to make sure the size is exact. Ours is exact. That's how we want it. And the last step would be, again, using a heat gun at roughly 145 degrees. You need to heat up one of the ends of the tubing that you just cut. Usually takes up to 10 seconds. You can kind of see that the ends, the tips get glossy as they get hot. You don't want to get them deforming just yet. Just get a little gloss, and that's how you know they're heating. You can see it. They get nice and round, and that usually means they're hot enough. That's when you would put the hot tip on your spring check valve and just slide it down almost to the base, and just set it aside to let it cool and set in. And for the same filters but with red heat shrink and 24 millimeter tubing, you would just repeat the same steps to assemble it. Get shorter piece of tubing, again heat it up. Be careful you have a lot less tubing that you're holding on to, not to burn yourself. Just wait for the tip to get glossy again. Again, make sure to evenly rotate it, not to heat up just one side of the tubing. We can see it's beginning to melt on the tip. That's when we know to set the heat gun back aside and just slide it over the spring check valve. And now we have one of each varieties that we will need. You just need 12 of each, and you would be done with making the filters for your machine. And that's it.